Hello, Year 5, and welcome to the 8th lesson out of a series of 10 based on the Windrush generation and the theme of community. Make sure you've got everything you need with you today: pen, pencil, and something to write with. Let's get started. So, here's today's starter activity. This time, I'm going to ask you to put words into these characters' mouths. What might they be talking about? I've given you an image from an ancient Greek pot. For those of you that have studied the Greeks, you'll know that they would paint pictures and stories, record historical events on these beautifully designed and carefully constructed pots. Take a look at this image here. Who might these two people be? Is one more important than the other? Do they know each other? What kind of people are they? Maybe what might their jobs be? Are there any clues? And I wonder what they might be looking at. Take a moment to pause the video and think about what do you think is happening in this situation, and jot down some of your own speech bubbles for them. Welcome back. I wonder what you thought they were saying. Maybe they're planning some war tactics. One of them there seems to be wearing a helmet. If we move our troops here, maybe we'll have the advantage. Let's have a look at another one. Here's another Greek pot. Carefully look at each of the characters. Think about their body language. Okay, why might the ladies there have one hand to their mouth and one hand down? Who is the person that seems to be in this throne or chair? What do we learn about the man in the middle? What might they be saying to each other? Be creative. It doesn't always have to be serious. Pause the video now so you can stop and think and put words into these characters' mouths. Welcome back. I wonder what these characters were saying to each other, really. I wonder what the event was, and I'm intrigued as to know a little bit more about this chair. Is this somebody from the past that needed help with maneuvering? Did they have a disability? Is it just a new throne? My, look at your wheels. So, with that aside, let's get started with today's lesson. So, in our previous lesson, we found out a little bit about what life was like for those migrants that came over to the UK as part of that Windrush generation, what their experiences were like in fitting in and settling in with the British community. We learnt that they weren't always as accepted and welcomed as we would have hoped. Today, we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail, but we're going to be looking at it in a much more recent part of our own history. Let's find out a little bit more about what happens in our book in Chapter 7, The Windrush Generation. Between 1947 and 1971, at least 300,000 people from the Caribbean came to Britain. These people were called the Windrush generation, and although they didn't all arrive on the Windrush ship, they were the foreparents of many of today's Black British people. By foreparents, what we mean is that lots of today's Black population, their parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles would have been the ones that first came over to Britain. The Windrush generation came to Britain for many reasons. Some people were invited to Britain to work. Both the NHS and the London Transport asked Caribbean people to come to Britain to work for them. And we can remember on our timeline right at the beginning of these 10 sessions that we saw that it was 1948 that the NHS got started. So they really were an integral part to what is now an internationally known institution and something that the British are very proud of. Other people found jobs after they came to Britain. Many people wanted to work and send some money back to the Caribbean to help their families there. Some people wanted to come to Britain mainly to study. During these years, many of the Windrush generation continued to face hardship and poor treatment from some of the white British population. Sometimes they were even physically attacked. Yet they continued to work hard and raise their children. They worked for the RAF, London Transport, Royal Mail, and the National Health Service. They also worked in Britain's coal mines, on the railways, in show business, and in many other industries. These brave pioneers helped to rebuild Britain and make it into today's modern nation. And now, people from all over the world have emigrated to Britain. By striving to improve their own lives, the Windrush pioneers changed the world. It's quite strong stuff there. And we have to think about and take into consideration what living in Britain might be like now if the Windrush generation hadn't been invited and hadn't been welcomed to Britain back in the late 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Would our NHS have been the strong and well-regarded unit that it is now? Would our cities have been rebuilt quite as quickly as they were? Now, like I said earlier, we're going to travel through time and we're going to bring us a little bit closer to now. And we're going to look at some newspaper headings. And let's see what they say about the Windrush generation. Anger over Windrush betrayal. 62-year-old man who visited Home Office to sort out citizenship is now in a prison cell. What else have we got? Windrush, the new betrayal. Home Office shredded documents that proved Caribbean migrants came to the UK decades ago. Interesting. The Home Office was accused of systematic incompetence over the Windrush scandal last night after officials admitted destroying thousands of vital documents. And if we look at the date there, we're looking at April the 18th in 2018. So this is just 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Fiasco that shames Britain. Shame is not a great emotion. Windrush outrage. Rudd faces call to quit as she's forced to admit Caribbean migrants to Britain could have been kicked out by mistake. This leads us to believe that some people that were living in the UK have been asked to leave, maybe go back to the Caribbean, because they weren't UK citizens anymore. And lastly here, Windrush scandal. We may have been deporting people in error, British government admits. When we read these headlines, it tells us that in the last 40, 50 years, something has gone wrong. Let's find out a little bit more about what that is. In some of our first lessons, We learnt about how the British Empire spread out across the whole world and how many countries across the world were colonies of Britain. They were under British rule. And this was true of the Caribbean. Because of this, anybody living in the Caribbean was seen as British subjects. And there was some confusion over whether a subject was the same as a citizen. We are all citizens of the UK. They were citizens of the Caribbean, but they were subjects of the British Empire. Now, when we called for help after the Second World War, and they were invited to come over and accept job opportunities across Britain, the Caribbean was still a colony of the British Empire. However, that status changed as time went on. And many of those colonial states then sought for independence. And they came away from British rule. So they were no longer seeing the Queen of England as their queen as well. They were their own state, province, country, and under their own jurisdiction. And legally, that caused some confusion, and those people that had migrated from the Caribbean over to the UK as to whether or not they were really British citizens anymore. In order to establish this, they were asked to prove their status as a British citizen. And the only way to do this was by providing British passports and various documentation from their arrival in the UK. If we have a little look at the bullet points below, we can see that the Home Office, those people that are in charge of who is here and why they're here in this country, kept no records of those granted leave to remain and issued no paperwork. And what we mean by granted leave to remain is that once those colonies became independent and they were no longer under British rule, that they were allowed to stay. Okay. So even though they might have said to these individuals, it's okay, you don't have to go back, there's no record of it. So there's no proof. This made it really difficult for the Windrush arrivals to prove that they were legal citizens and they had a right to stay here. And in 2010, so 10 years ago, before this scandal came to light and people realised that we needed that documentation, the Home Office destroyed the landing cards belonging to Windrush migrants. So anybody that came over to Britain during those years and who are regarded as the Windrush generation, so from 1947 through to about 1971-72, when they arrived in Britain, they were given a landing card to say they had arrived. And that document was also kept by the Home Office and that they were legally allowed to stay here. And the Home Office destroyed them all. So once again, there was no evidence of there being an agreement with the British government to say it was okay for them to be here and to remain as residents in Britain. But because people had come from British colonies that were once ruled by Britain, they believed that they still had the right to be here. So there was suddenly a lot of confusion when the government started and the Home Office started checking on people's legalities and whether or not should be here, and issuing them with letters and requests for all this paperwork that no longer existed or was never created in the first place. Many of which, when they couldn't provide the correct paperwork, were put in prison. And it was then decided by the government whether or not they were illegally allowed to stay in Britain or they had to return to the Caribbean. This was hugely upsetting for many people. Let's find out what the government did when they were made aware of these issues. So there we have it. Theresa May issued an apology. Your task today is simply to reflect on the news about the Windrush generation that came to light in 2018. By reflect, we mean think back over. Begin to think about what we've learned and how it makes us feel as individuals. What questions does it raise? What opinions do we formulate as we listen to what happened and the consequences of what happened? I've given you some sentence starters to help you to write your reflection. When I first learned about the Windrush generation, I thought that the people coming to Britain were brave, courageous, adventurous, opportunists, because they moved to a very different part of the world and they didn't know what to expect, because they worked hard to get a better life for themselves and their family back at home, because they didn't let the hostilities from the British public stop them. So think about that when we first learnt about that Windrush generation, all those lessons ago. The Windrush generation helped Britain by, what did they help us with? So again, we're reflecting back, thinking about what we already know. Some of the challenges the Windrush generation faced were, we looked at these in yesterday's lesson. Maybe it's the way they were treated, maybe it was how easy it was to find somewhere to live or to get a job. When I saw the newspaper headings from 2018, I felt, because I felt shocked, because I didn't expect the British government to treat its citizens like that. I felt worried because I knew that many of these people believed the UK to be their home, and now they were being told they weren't. What would they do? Where would they go? Who was going to help them? Now I wonder, what is it? What do you wonder? What do you think? Has the government changed? the way it deals with historical documents, things that they should be keeping. I wonder whether the apology was enough, whether those people that were part of the Windrush generation, they stayed here, they saw Britain as their home. Do they still see it as their home after they've been treated like this? And my message to the Windrush generation is, what do you want to say to them? To never give up hope, to know that they are valued and that they are considered a British citizen in your eyes. Is your message to them that as a member of the British community, we are all equal? What was your message going to be to them? Today really is about thinking things through, about from what we've learned, how we felt about what we've learned, and then what the consequences of that are. If you don't wish to write this down, you may want to do this verbally with an adult that's with you. Or you may wish to record yourself going over your thoughts. That's it for today. I shall see you again tomorrow for our 9th session. Bye-bye.